If your goal is to plant climbing roses, then you need to be aware they won't grab onto a fence. In order to make them successful on this block wall, we put a very simple trellis that anyone can build. We will talk to you about which roses we picked and how we built the trellis. These are 16-foot long, 5 feet tall, heavy gauge welded wire in 4x4 squares. We found that stores like Home Depot and Lowe's have something similar, but they're not as heavy a gauge of wire. And we like this heavy gauge because it gives a little bit of support to the fence. And it's strong, and these roses over time get heavy. Yeah, you can use thinner wire. I'm not real impressed with the finished effect. It tends to not be as rigid, and it might waffle, or I'm not sure what the right word is, but it's not straight. These are 16-foot lengths. If you want, you can cut them into whatever size you need. This is 252 feet. If you use any other products, it's more expensive. If you build a wood trellis, it's way more expensive. So this is simple, easy to construct. You know, when you first plant the roses, you see the trellis more than anything. We painted it a nondescript color that makes it not real noticeable, and we used the Benjamin Moore color Dragon's Breath. You should hardly notice the wire, and eventually the roses will touch each other and you won't see the wire at all. The way we attached it is really very simple. We drilled holes in the block wall, and we used these simple, what I call eye hooks. I think maybe that's what they're called, and we painted them Dragon's Breath also. And we used enough to support these 16-foot long pieces. We put them in about every 8 feet, and that's the trellis. And about as simple a trellis as I can imagine. You want to plant them as close to the wire as you can get. I would prefer that these were closer, but the reason they're not, and many times they're not on a block wall, is there's a footing, and the footing is solid concrete, and so you can't get any closer unless you want to damage the footing, which we don't want to do. These were planted right up next to the footing, and then we tilt them a little. Over time, you won't even notice the space because the trunks will get much bigger. You don't have to go out there every day and help them twist around it, but you have to get them started so they'll latch onto that wire, and then on their own, they'll start to grab it and grow. And I like to use green horticultural tape. We'll just tie the rose tendrils to the wire. We're also going to take off all the stakes, and then we'll attach the ones that are big enough. Some aren't big enough, but the ones that are big enough, we'll attach them to the wire. These rose varieties were selected for their color, their size, their vitality, their adaptivity to our climate, very hot summers. There's 6 of them: Don Juan, Joseph's Coat, Pretty in Pink, Golden Opportunity, Zephyrine Druhin, and Lavender Crush. You might get the idea that those are all very different colors. So what they're after is this kind of, I might call an orgasmic mix of color, really spectacular. They have low roses in the foreground, and then they have these big roses all up against the back, and really vivid, bright colors. And, you know, it's going to look fantastic. There's one different variety next to each other 6 times, and then we start the 6 over again. There's quite a variation in climbing rose sizes. So when you select the rose, some don't get that big, some don't spread that much, some of these spread more. We kind of like the idea of them growing together and mixing together, so we're not worried about it. But there's no hard and fast rule they have to be spaced 10 feet. That's just what we came up with here because they really wanted to use 6 different roses 4 times. And so they had 252 feet, so the 10 feet spacing came out of that. If you look up the roses, it'll give you what they like in terms of climate, and also how big they get, how tall and wide they get, areas of the country they do well in. So you'll be considering all those things. And then the color obviously is a big consideration with climbing roses. The other thing to be aware of is sometimes you go online or look in a book and you find these climbing roses that you love, but you can't find anyone that grows them. So if you're thinking you know where you're going to buy them, you might check with what's available. In this case, the owner became convinced she wanted that Lavender Crush. I could not find it locally. So one of the neat things about buying plants these days is you can go online and find Lavender Crush. So it came from another state, but I was able to find Lavender Crush. All the other roses I bought at local nurseries here in Fresno. For climbing roses, you don't do a lot of pruning because it's almost impossible to prune them once they get intertwined in the wire. But you can prune for width, and so you might want to come and prune it to keep encouraging it to stay flat. And then if you wanted to, you don't have to, but you can prune off old blooms, which is a lot of work. You probably do increase future blooms if you prune off dying blooms, but that's difficult to do on a 250 feet long area of climbing roses. The way we're going to get these to perform like crazy is with our blend, about 3 cups when we plant, and then we're going to spray over the blend in what we think is the root zone with Penetrate Liquid Biotiller. That is spectacular for roses. And then every year add that same blend and Penetrate Liquid Biotiller, and by doing that you'll encourage a massive bloom and a really healthy climbing rose. I'd say about 3 years. The wall will mostly be covered. In about 3 years you'll see much more climbing rose than wire. So I hope you liked our video on climbing roses. Please like it if you found it helpful in any way, and also subscribe and help us get more subscribers and more viewers.